and European Free Alliance, Mr. President Daniel Cohn Bendit. The floor is yours.
Moi, je suis comme.
Well, like Guy Verhofstadt, I'm going to use all my speaking time now. Colleagues, President, I think that Martin Schulz and Guy Verhofstadt have hit the nail on the head, and they've really identified the difficulty of the situation in which we find ourselves. Since the Lisbon Treaty entered into force, I think there has been a tug of war over the treaty and how it should be interpreted. I think that before they signed up to it, the leaders hadn't read it. And once it came into force, people thought that it was an instrument for the community method. You will remember that we had that battle over services and on financial regulation. And in all the discussions we've had, we seem to have ended up in the same place, which is as follows: whether we are moving towards an intergovernmental Europe or whether what we are witnessing is a strengthening of the community method. And I think this really is the heart of the matter when we look at the state of Europe today. What I dream of is a public declaration on the part of the Commission, whereas in actual fact there is a political battle going on in the European institutions right now, and that political battle has to do with the interpretation of the Lisbon Treaty, and that has all kinds of knock-on effects for European citizens. They need to know what we feel when we have these interinstitutional debates, and I'm afraid on that, Mr. Barroso, you were silent. This brings me on to my second point. This Commission has made a number of general statements in which it acts as the champion of Europe. It utters many fine words, but when it comes to actually pointing the finger at a given government, then really you are conspicuous by your absence. There, truly, you do not exist. Let me illustrate this by way of an example. Take Greece. You know, everyone knows, for years, everyone has known. 2 or 3 years before the crisis erupted, you had all kinds of reports in your drawers, and you know that the situation in Greece was already spinning out of control. But you don't make any kinds of official declarations. You simply hope and pray that the situation will somehow resolve itself. But that was not the case in Greece. Now, you supported, and the majority of us here supported, a situation in which we brought huge pressure to bear on the Greek people and on the Greek elite. But at the very moment in which we were militating to try and make sure that the situation was resolved, I heard absolutely nothing about the fact that in August of this year there were negotiations between the Greek government and major French and German arms manufacturers to continue selling arms to Greece. And really, we're crazy. You know, I've said this 3 or 4 times. When are we going to act? Are you aware of how much Greece has spent on arms over the last 10 years? 50 billion euro in the space of 10 years. That is the figure for Greece's arms spending over the last 10 years. So, Mr. Barroso, that of course is one of the problems of the country. It is linked to the structure of Europe, nationalism, and the whole context of debate between Greece and Turkey. That is why the Commission and Europe have to intervene. They can do something by bringing in Turkey, by integrating Turkey. We can put an end to this crazy state of affairs which costs the Greek people millions, but basically they get nothing for all their money because, you know, they're just basically getting the weapons that the French and Germans don't need for their own armies. Now, this is an example that I'm giving you, Mr. Barroso, an example of the way in which your Commission has failed to act. And I want to pick up on another example which was given by Guy Verhofstadt. Look at what's happening right now with the Roma. I really think that this is a test of the credibility of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. And that Charter is an integral part of the Lisbon Treaty. And I think we have to be moral and philosophical in our approach here. Albert Camus said that the defense of democracy is the defense of minorities. We should not simply execute the will of the majority. So, I'm sure that the Commission has all the information, it has reports, and you've got to say loud and clear what France is doing. It is breaching the European treaties. I mean, surely there's nothing more simple than saying it out loud. Let me give you another example. Let me give you another example of the kind of things that you sweep under the carpet that you don't talk about. You've talked about the economy, you've talked about employment, you've talked about growth as well, but you have failed to say that we need to change the nature of growth. You have failed to say that the environmental catastrophe we are facing will have to force us to reinterpret our understanding of growth. Now, we've got Cancun in 3 months' time, but you fail to say anything at all about the fact that if we are to be credible in the climate change debate, then we are going to have to look at the 30% cut in CO2 emissions, and we've got to be in the vanguard of the debate on climate change. And there again, President, unfortunately, you had absolutely nothing to say. So this is why I say that really you are the absent president of a Europe which badly needs a president, and that basically is the state of the Union. But let me just add one thing. You talked about European investment. I mean, look at the clock if you like. I know that I've got another 3 minutes or so. That might bother you, but that's simply the way things are. Let me just say one more thing to you. Let's take these things seriously. 40% of CO2 emissions are generated in Europe by the building industry, whereas in Europe we need a European energy fund, and you need to make it possible for European towns and cities to restore and renovate buildings throughout the continent. We need a European fund because national governments don't seem to be capable of doing so. Now, there is a major debate raging in Europe, people talking about whether we need public investment. And let me tell you, President Barroso, what we need is Keynes in Brussels. Public investment needs to be European investment for the environmental transformation of our economy. Have you grasped that, Mr. Barroso? If you've understood, I very much hope that when it comes to your next State of the Union address, you will show us that you have understood that we're no longer in the 1970s. Rather, we are faced with a financial crisis as well as with an ecological crisis. And to close, I want to give you some food for thought. This is a figure we should think about. We've 50,000 billion euro. That is the figure. That's 5 centuries of public investment for development aid. We're talking about 10 billion schools in Africa, in Africa. So this is the situation in which the world finds itself. Thank you very much.
Next speaker is on behalf of European Conservatives and Reformists, Mr. President Michał Tomasz Kamiński. The floor is yours.
Dziękuję bardzo, panie przewodniczący.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll start with the good news for President Barroso.